Well, good morning, everybody. Barry Jones, SP History, continuing on with our series about the deep state. And of course, we define the deep state as the national security apparatus and all the industries that feed it. The national security apparatus in question, the subject of this series is the FBI. And we are up to, well, we're getting closer. We've been working chronologically towards the date of the JFK assassination. And So what I hope to do today is continue to answer the questions that I gave you. Um, Before I review those questions, I just want to again go over this slide because this is a very important thing to understand about all of these operations relating to the FBI and the CIA. Sometimes we draw a line of distinction, and there is a distinction. Generally speaking, the FBI is supposed to be a domestic uh, intelligence organization, and the CIA is supposed to be foreign. But relating to my question, how did the CIA get away with these domestic operations in the 60s? Uh, and I posit, it's my theory that the reason they got away with it is because they were participating with the FBI, accomplishing the same agenda. And three of their operations in particular that I pull out and draw special attention to is, first of all, the FBI and its COINTELPRO operation, which started in 56, ran all the way to 71. We didn't find out about it until 75 during the church hearings. So they thought they got away with it. Anyway, and we'll talk later about how it even got discovered. It was totally accidental. It was not a intentional thing at all. Anyway, it wasn't even the result of somebody researching or investigating. Like I said, it was completely accidental. So anyway, they start this operation in 56 to 71, and this directly reflects the leader, the director of the FBI, and his anti-communist agenda, which has been basically with him since he got into the intelligence field. It's been his number one obsession. His number two obsession has been anti-civil rights and specifically civil rights leaders who he designated as threats, internal threats to national security. So COINTELPRO was a surveillance, but it went far beyond that. And I read to you right out of the FBI manual the the playbook or the agenda of COINTELPRO was to surveil, was to infiltrate, it was to discredit. It was basically to destroy these groups from within, whether they be communist, the American Communist Party, or SCLC, Martin Luther King's group, or the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X's group, the Black Panthers, whatever. Uh, I use the term rat fucking because I think it describes all of that. You surveil, you infiltrate, you destroy from within, right? And up to and including assassination, if that's what it takes. That's rat fucking. That's what COINTEL is. And the distinction here, or the important thing here, is it's against American citizens. Okay. Anyway, the FBI is doing that for about 15, 16 years. Included within that same time period are two CIA programs or operations aimed at exactly the same targets. I'll start with the bottom one. Chaos is essentially the CIA equivalent of the FBI's COINTELPRO. They're virtually the same. And where COINTELPRO is attacking or targeting uh, civil rights groups and communist groups, so is Chaos. Chaos is, famously, the most famous event during this Chaos operation was the Charles Manson murders, and they used MK Ultra. They folded MK Ultra within Chaos to accomplish their goal, which was to create the impression of race war. The idea within the white community, the white population in America, the blacks are going to rise up. It's going to be this race war. It's going to be this, and it was intended to discredit the civil rights movement, uh, specifically the more paramilitary types, like the Panthers or like Nation of Islam. to make it seem like violence was right on the horizon. And you had to scare the white population, and you target rich white kids or a very affluent section of Hollywood, white victims, so that the white population thinks, well, they're not safe. Our kids aren't safe. Nobody's safe. And so anyway, that was, and of course they were going after communist groups too. Primarily the Vietnam War protesters, and of course the CIA had a real big dog in that fight because it was their war. So uh, for those reasons, I believe they were allowed to operate on domestic soil because the FBI saw the CIA as a handy, uh, sort of a handmaiden. They were involved in the same pursuits. So, and then the other big operation is ZR Rifle, which was the targeting of one person. That was JFK, whom the CIA had designated as soft on communism and wasn't going to give them the Vietnam War like they wanted, and a whole host of other reasons. Of course, he's also pro-civil rights. So the target of ZR Rifle is a pro-civil rights, uh, anti-Vietnam War, which could be spun into soft on communism, right? It's the same agenda in both cases. The this anti-civil rights agenda, this anti-communist agenda, COINTELPRO, ZR Rifle, Chaos, they're all aimed at the exact same targets. And so the CIA is able to bring its expertise in the foreign field, which it has already been carrying out executive action, assassinating foreign heads of state, bring it home to America and use that same expertise here at home against an American target using CIA assets against an American target on American soil. It's totally illegal. And if the FBI was doing its job, they would have caught him. But the FBI, it wasn't that it wasn't doing its job. It thought it was doing its job by allowing the CIA to help target these same targets, so to speak. So anyway, these are the some of the operations we're looking at, and that's one of the questions. I told you I had a series of questions I wanted to answer as I proceed through this series. Number one, how did the CIA get away with a domestic operation, which resulted in the assassination of JFK? Okay, I think I just answered that. And we will continue to show more and more proof of that. But basically, the CIA got away with the domestic operation because it was helping the FBI achieve its goals. And so there was a wink and a nod, uh, basically permission granted. And then afterwards, to cover up its negligence, it had to cover up the CIA's role or its the conspiracy involving the CIA in these domestic operations. Otherwise, it lead back to the FBI. What was the FBI doing? So once you permit the operation to begin, you have to continue all the way through the cover up. The second question is, how did Hoover's personal ambitions, his politics, and his connections, personal connections, contribute to the FBI's institutional motives to immunize the plotters in Dallas? We are working on that. I've gone through a lot of his personal ambitions, which can be summed up in one word: it's power. And he's willing to use anything to achieve that power, right? Blackmail, extortion. He's willing to leak classified information or damaging information to politicos. He he he's willing to work with people that he deems necessary to the continuation of his power, to the growing of his power. It's all about power with him. And he discovers pretty quickly that if you ingratiate yourself to the president, whoever that might be, you everything gets everything sits a lot easier for you. So, when FDR was president, this goes all the way back, he used flattery and he got his way. When it was Truman, he had to leak things because Truman didn't take him serious. And then when it was Eisenhower, he pretty much got everything he wanted. You don't hear much, uh, uh, not much space between the FBI and the White House when Eisenhower was president. I've always thought it was amusing when people said that, say that Eisenhower, and try to give him credit, that Eisenhower is the first to really warn the American people of the military-industrial complex, i.e., the deep state. He laid a turd on JFK's desk when JFK became president in '61. Say, here's what exists. It grew while I was president. In fact, I helped make it grow. I helped create it. I helped make it what it is today. Uh, Good luck dealing with it. And it was JFK who actually did try to deal with it. And that's why all the problems start again. And you hear about all these blackmails between Hoover and Kennedy. And of course, Kennedy plays the game right back with Hoover. It's just continual warfare on both fronts. People always talk about the war between JFK and the CIA. Well, there was a war between JFK and the FBI as well, Hoover. So anyway, those are his personal ambitions. And of course, if he is essentially the FBI. So as Hoover goes, so goes the FBI. As far as his personal politics, I've already mentioned it. He's virulently anti-communist, and he's virulently anti-civil rights. And all during his time in office, you see the FBI targeting those two groups. I mean, they're just reflecting the will of their leader. And meanwhile, the mob's running around doing all kinds of stuff, and they're just ignoring it. Hoover's running around saying, there's no such thing as a mafia. That leads to the third one, which is connections. He has all these personal connections to the sweet AF, big oil people, and these big politicians like LBJ, connections to the well, obviously LBJ, that's a big one going forward. But we've seen that his connections are pretty deep within the mob as well. And I told you about the La Jolla racetrack out there in California, owned by Clint Murchison, and how Clint Murchison comped him so he could cover his losses and things. But he was out there with other men that were getting comped by Murchison. Those guys were Meyer Lansky, Santos Trafficante, Johnny Rosselli, Sam Giancana, Carlos Marcel. These are the biggest mobsters in the country. And of course, he also has a relationship with Frank Costello. And he's like the Don of all Dons of the 5 families in New York. He also owns a racetrack. He also comps J. Edgar Hoover. And he's also whispering in Hoover's ear all the time, there's no such thing as a Cosa Nostra. And so, he's got these connections. He's doing their bidding, not just because they're competent for all these gambling debts, but also because they have compromat. They have blackmail information on him about his personal life. So that's why you see from an institutional standpoint, the FBI is leaving the mob alone, because the leader of the FBI doesn't want the FBI snooping around in the mob. Leads right back to him. So over and over and over again, you see examples of his personal life, whether it be his ambitions, his political leanings, which were far right, or his personal connections, how they're influencing the direction of the FBI itself. And I guess we really shouldn't be surprised. That's sort of how leadership works. The third question that we've touched on so far are there indications that the FBI had foreknowledge? And we've gone through quite a list so far, and today we're going to expand on that. And then we haven't even begun to get to the rest of these questions yet. And as we do, I'll remind you of them. So these are the first 3 that we're looking at. And today I want to tell the story of Richard Case Naggell. This is, without a doubt, it's just so incriminating to the FBI, so incriminating to Hoover, this whole episode. So let's tell the story of Richard Naggell. We are up to September of 1963. So we're getting closer to that D-Day of November 22nd, 1963. Richard Naggell, a U.S. Army counterintelligence officer from 55 to 59. And during that time, he was assigned to Field Operations Intelligence, FOI, to carry out, quote, CIA policy and cover. So this guy's steeped in intelligence. And he's not just working with military intelligence, he's also working with the CIA. He was trained to use simple, intricate weapons to be used in assassinations. So his expertise is in assassinations and the use of these weaponry to be used in these assassinations. That's not a coincidence, by the way. Here's an interesting detail. He was stationed while he's in the military. He's stationed in Japan, Tokyo, as a double agent in liaison with Soviet intelligence, during which he worked with another counterintelligence agent named, Lee Harvey Oswald. Both worked on the exact same code name, Alec Heidel. Pretty famously, we're all aware of this. If you have any basic knowledge of the assassination, you know that when Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested, he had two forms of ID on him. One that said Lee Harvey Oswald, and the other that said Alec Heidel. What Alec Heidel is, if you believe the story of Richard Naggell, is it's a cover name or a code name for his counterintelligence job or responsibilities. So right there, you have a connection of the patsy to counterintelligence. Right there, you have a connection of Lee Harvey Oswald to this guy, Richard Naggell, which we know Richard Naggell, it's documented, was in counterintelligence. They're both using the same code name. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This is some pretty damning evidence right off the bat that the CIA's guy is the so-called patsy. I mean, they're connected by the same code name. And ironically, they're both stationed in Tokyo, Japan at the same time, or in Japan at the same time. So we're going to see this connection continue, by the way. So he works as a double agent. And he's literally working with Soviet intelligence operating out of Mexico City. And to his American handlers, primarily Desmond Fitzgerald, he would report back. Desmond Fitzgerald was the chief of the CIA's Cuban task force. And this was his boss, American boss, CIA boss. So after he gets out of the military, he's full-fledged CIA, and he's serving as a double agent, working with Soviet intelligence in Mexico City, reporting to his boss, Desmond Fitzgerald. And during this time, the KGB assigned him to monitor Lee Harvey Oswald because the Soviets don't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was a real defector when he went to Russia. So that by the time we get to 63, he's back in America. So they have their double agent, whom they don't realize is a double agent. They think he's working for them, but they know he's got a connection to this guy, Oswald, going back to his days in the military. So they say, we want you to monitor this Oswald so that we can either confirm or deny, figure out what he was during that time he was in the Soviet Union. That might help us understand if he is if he is intelligence and he came over here as a fake defector, he was sent here by American intelligence for a purpose. And we need to know what that purpose was. So they're following that they want to follow Oswald around. Of course, in another interesting twist, that whole marriage between Oswald and Marina was arranged. It was arranged by Soviet intelligence. And of course, if you're familiar with Marina and who raised her uncle Prusakova, he was in the MKD or MKVD. I can't remember how you say it. They got all these alphabet soup agencies over there in Russia, and that was Soviet intelligence. So there's a lot of speculation that she was Russian intelligence, Soviet intelligence, and they married her to Oswald so that when he returned, they already knew he was trying to go back to the United States. So they thought, well, if he got one over on us, then if we can marry him to our Soviet spy, then we can keep tabs on him going forward. And we'll have our spy embedded with their spy. the wilderness of mirrors. Anyway, we know for a fact that Richard Naggell was following because that was his assignment. So we talked about this event. This picture should be familiar. The previous episode, we talked about Oswald's handing out these leaflets in New Orleans, and This picture in particular, you can't quite see Chauncey Holt. The frame, move my picture. You see my cursor right in that area is Chauncey Holt, and this guy turned. This is Leon Young. These are both. Oops, these are both CIA guys. Anyway, that was a whole nother story. But here's Oswald passing out these leaflets, and Naggell is monitoring them. And while he's doing this, he becomes involved in both New Orleans and Texas because Oswald, before he was in New Orleans, he was in Texas. So that's primarily the two locations he's been. So everywhere Oswald is, Naggell is. So he's in New Orleans and Texas. And he notices that Oswald is constantly around these two Cuban exiles, whom he knows as Angel and Leopoldo. I identify who those are in other episodes. But anyway, these guys are big time anti-Castro, involved in the anti-Castro movement, Operation Mongoose, et cetera, et cetera. And their bosses are in Miami, which is Jam Wave and the head of the whole anti-Castro operation. Anyway, according to Naggell, who is reporting this to his bosses, the KGB, Angel and Leopoldo and Oswald are all part of this conspiracy or some kind of operation to kill JFK. But what Naggell notices is that they're not all operating in the same way or in the same manner. Because Oswald is doing what he has been assigned to do. He is an FBI informant. And as an FBI informant, what the FBI wanted, because they needed access to inside knowledge of what the CIA was up to, was inside access or somebody to infiltrate these anti-Castro groups that are all sponsored by the CIA. And so he has infiltrated Alpha 66, which is known as the most violent. There's a bunch of anti-Castro groups coming out of Miami. They're spread out all over the South. So they're in New Orleans and Miami and Dallas, but primarily out of Miami. And he has infiltrated this group. He's informing for the FBI. And the reason he's pretending like he's one of them, right? As an infiltrator, that's what you have to do. Otherwise, you get exposed. And as such, he's working with these two, Angel and Leopoldo, who are full-fledged members of Alpha 66. This is a CIA-financed anti-Castro militant group, extremely violent. So you see, they're doing different jobs. Angel and Leopoldo are working for Alpha 66, doing Alpha 66 type things. Lee Harvey Oswald is working in this capacity for the FBI and infiltrating Alpha 66, informing on Alpha 66 to the FBI. Okay. And of course, he's a CIA asset at the same time, which is how he got access to Alpha 66, because he's technically one of them, right? Anyway, this is what Naggell is reporting. This Alpha 66, just a little explanation on that. This is a paramilitary group. They've cobbled together some of the most violent Cuban, anti-Castro Cubans, these exiles that are extremely motivated to want to kill Castro and overthrow his government. And this was a group put together by David Atlee Phillips. It's directed by David Atlee Phillips. Of course, he is the CIA station chief down in Mexico City. His expertise is disinformation. That's how he rose through the ranks. And he's also one of Oswald's handlers during this time. So it's very convenient that the guy in charge of Alpha 66 assigns Lee Harvey Oswald to work with them since he's his handler. That's his group. That's how he got access. His boss, his handler, told him to go. What he doesn't realize is that he's also informing for the FBI. And so the FBI says, well, while you're working with Alpha 66, inform on them for us. Tell us what they're up to. That's essentially what an informant does. He goes where he's assigned and he reports back to his whomever his informant contact is, what's going on at his assignment. That's what he's doing. And Alpha 66 is just, it's a, Kennedy has a tiger by the tail. This group won't lay down. You know, by this point in 63, late fall, Kennedy's trying to shut down all this Operation Mongoose stuff. And Alpha 66 keeps attacking Russian ships in Cuban ports, trying to provoke this war between the U.S. and Cuba. And, you know, uh, JFK's made promises to Khrushchev, we won't mess around anymore in Cuba. CIA knows this. And so they keep instigating these little attacks to discredit and make Kennedy look like he's gone back on his word, to anger Khrushchev. And maybe one of them in an unguarded moment will do something that will lead to a war. That's the whole, it's just provocation after provocation after provocation. And of course, JFK's, he's pulling his hair out. He's ordered a government crackdown on all these raids. They keep going behind his back doing it anyway. And there's this war between the White House and the CIA and these anti-Castro Cuban exiles who are sponsored by the CIA. So essentially, it's between the White House and the CIA. And so that's the backdrop, what's going on here. So the KGB orders Naggell because Naggell is convinced that Angel and Leopoldo are actually setting up Oswald in this operation to kill JFK. What he reports to the KGB is that they are setting him up to be the patsy. And the reason they're setting up him to be the patsy because he went to Russia and he has all these communist bona fides, right? He said he was going to renounce his American citizenship, become Soviet. He said he was a Marxist. He's been all over television saying that. He's running this pro-Castro. He all summer he ran Fair Play for Cuba out of New Orleans. So, but the fact that he went to Russia, that's what concerns the KGB. They're saying if he gets set up to be the patsy and they kill JFK, then that's going to eventually it's going to rebound on us, and we're going to get roped into this because they're going to say, well, he was a communist, he was working for the Russians, he's working for the KGB, which is why all this Mexico City story ends up this concoction of David Atlee Phillips later, this Mexico City story about Oswald in October meeting with, or late September meeting with the Russian assassination expert, Valeriy Kostikov. You know, and then 2 months later, he assassinates the president. 2 + 2 he meets with the Soviet KGB assassination expert in Mexico City. He must be learning how to carry out an assassination for the Soviets, for the KGB. He went to Russia. He's a Marxist. He married a Russian woman. He's working for the Russians. And that's what the KGB is concerned about. If he gets successfully sheep dipped as the patsy, we're going to be on the hook for this assassination. So they order Naggell, you've got to tell Oswald what's going on. He's getting set up. Tell him that he's being set up to be the patsy of this assassination. And if he doesn't listen to you, kill him. Kill him. Don't kill him on American soil. That's a problem. But when he goes to Mexico City to meet with his handler, to meet with his boss, David Atlee Phillips, he's going to be in Mexico City at some point. When he goes there, and of course, we all know he ends up in Mexico City at the end of September. When he goes to Mexico City, as part of this setup, you got to kill him if he won't listen to you, if he doesn't believe you. And of course, they know each other. Naggell and Oswald know each other from back during their military days. So the thinking is, on the KGB's part, is that, oh, my long lost friend is going to show up and warn me that I'm being set up in something. And since He knows me going back to my days in the Marine Corps or Army, going back to the days of the counterintelligence back in Japan. Since he knows me, we use the same code name. Since he knows me and what I do for a living, he will believe you. So anyway, the purpose of this is to prevent the JFK assassination because they realize if they can sabotage the CIA's efforts here to scapegoat Oswald and to assassinate the president, then they will save themselves at the same time because they realize what's happening is the CIA is trying to scapegoat, or it's a false flag, right? They're trying to make the Soviets the culprit for the president's death by using a Soviet associated patsy. That's the connective tissue there. So Naggell, later testified to this or wrote about in his book. He says, if anybody wanted to stop the assassination, it was the KGB. They just didn't do enough. They knew about it in advance. They didn't want it to go through because they knew it was being set up in such a way it's going to look like the Soviets did it or ordered it. So he follows through with this meeting. He meets Oswald in New Orleans, September, and he warns him. He says, Angel and Leopold are not who you think they are. They're this plot that they're setting up. It's going to fall on you. You're getting set up. And Oswald didn't believe him. He was unconvinced. Lots of speculation about that, about why he would be unconvinced. And you have to understand the full picture, the full context of what Oswald was involved in at that time. And I could make an argument for why he was unconvinced, because he was involved in other things as well. He thought he was pretty important to this whole scheme of things. Too big a person to be sacrificed, in other words. But anyway, he didn't believe him. So now remember, now the KGB says if he doesn't believe you, you got to kill him. Well, Naggell is trying to find a way out of this because he's a double agent. So, yes, he works for the KGB, but he's only doing that because his real boss, the CIA, has told him to work with the KGB and be a double agent. So his real boss is American CIA, which means he can't kill Oswald. So he's trying to find a way around and accomplish the KGB overall objective another way, which is to stop it, to prevent the assassination. So instead of killing him on September 17th, 1963, Naggell sends a registered letter to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. This goes to foreknowledge, folks. Okay. And he warned, he just laid it out there. He warned of the president's impending assassination. He says, quote, I informed the director of the FBI, others, all his CIA contacts as well, which is interesting because the CIA is in charge of this whole assassination plot. They already know about this, but he doesn't know that they know. He thinks this is an Alpha 66 thing. And so he's reporting up the chain to his CIA bosses. Hey, there's a plot to kill the president. At the same time, because it's domestic, he's reporting to the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, that the American president is a target. And he names names. He says Lee Harvey Oswald and two of his Cuban associates were planning to assassinate the president of the United States, adding that he had, quote, received instructions to take care of Lee Harvey Oswald, that is to kill him, in September 1963. So he is essentially giving up his cover. He's telling Hoover who and what he is, how he got this information. But he's trying to activate the FBI to prevent this assassination in the process. He's like, well, if I have to blow my cover in the process, so be it. But I have to do this. I can't allow this assassination to take place. And I can't go kill Oswald. And we'll get into that in just a second. Naggell warned Hoover. He gave him dates. He said the assassination was probably on the, quote, 26th, 27th, 28th, or 29th of September in Washington, D.C. That was where this plot was supposed to take place. People don't know a lot about this plot. They know about the Chicago, they know about the Miami plots, Tampa, of course, Dallas. A lot of people don't realize that there was an earlier plot in Washington, D.C. Now, juxtapose that information with what Oswald is doing on his own, separate from what Naggell is doing. 2 weeks earlier, September 1st, Oswald had written to the commie. Here's the thing, Oswald always leaves a paper trail. Always. Handwritten paper trail. That's the key word, handwritten. And that's part of his sheep dipping. He's instructed, assigned, write this letter to the American Communist Party, which of course we've already learned that J. Edgar Hoover is surveilling these communists, the COINTELPRO's surveilling these communist parties. So he knows. And anyway, he writes the Communist Party, says, quote, please advise me as to how I can contact the party in the Baltimore, Washington area, to which I shall relocate in October. So there he is, laying it out. This guy who's really never been in that part of the country long term. He lived in New York. He was a kid for a brief time. Mostly New Orleans and Dallas, Fort Worth area. Now he's saying that he's going to relocate. Of course, this is not just him. This will be his wife and kids, plural. We're going to relocate to the Baltimore, Washington area. How can I get in touch with the Communist Party? This is part of the communist legend, right? Same day, he writes to the Socialist Workers' Party in New York. Please advise me as to how I can get into direct contact with Socialist Worker Party reps in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. I and my family are moving to that area in October. This is part of the incriminating paper trail that's going to be later dumped on the American people as part of the cover story. Look at this guy. He ran Fair Play for Cuba all summer. Now, in the fall, he's writing the Communist Party and the Socialist Workers' Party. And he is moving. He's leaving that, including that detail about how they're moving. He said that twice, how they're moving to the Washington, Baltimore area in October. So if this assassination, let's just play it out in our minds, if this assassination happened like it's supposed to, it's going to be an easy sell to the American people. You're going to have a paper trail. This communist killed the president. And we know he's a communist because he's contacting all these Communist Party. He's writing these letters to the Communist Party in these different locations. And he's saying in his own words that he's moving to that area. So he'll have an opportunity. He'll live there, right? So Naggell this is what Oswald is doing separately from what Naggell is doing. And you put the two together and you realize this thing's really happening. In real time, it's really happening. Oswald is being moved to the Washington, Baltimore area. He's writing these letters to create a legend. There's an assassination plot. No doubt Angel and Leopold are telling him to do all these things, who are being instructed by David Atlee Phillips, no doubt. And all of this is being created. And Naggell's watching it, and he's reporting up to the KGB what's going on. He's reporting to the CIA what's going on. He's reporting to the FBI what's going on. He's supposed to tell Oswald. Oswald doesn't believe him, and then he's supposed to kill him. He doesn't want to. He's in a quandary. As a CIA counterintelligence agent, he's doing his job by being a double agent. He's serving with the KGB in the U.S. and Mexico, but he's reporting on all those activities to his boss, Desmond Fitzgerald. And in his KGB job, he's watching Oswald, and he's watching Oswald act out his role as an infiltrator of a CIA plot to kill JFK. And of course, so he's privy to what's happening. He has this knowledge. He's like, what do I do with this knowledge? So far, he's shared it with Oswald. He shared it with the FBI. He shared it with the CIA. Right? Oswald didn't believe him. He's supposed to kill him. What do I do? If he does nothing and the plot goes through and JFK ends up, he was an unwitting participant alongside the patsy. He had knowledge, did nothing to stop it. The president's now dead. He's involved in this conspiracy to commit treason. It's part of the reason why he wrote the letter. Part of the reason he went to his bosses at the CIA, part of the reason he wrote the letter to Hoover, so that no one can ever say he didn't try. On the other hand, if he does what the Soviets want to do and he kills Oswald and blocks the murder that way, JFK assassination that way, now he's committed murder against a U.S. intelligence asset at the behest of the Soviets, which is essentially murder and treason. So he is between a rock and a hard place. If he does nothing, JFK dies, he's part of a treasonous plot. If he kills Oswald, he's now killed an American asset at the behest of the Soviets, which means he's committed murder and treason. I mean, this poor guy has been placed in a no-win situation. So on September 20, 1963, Naggell walks into a bank calmly in El Paso, Texas, fires 2 shots from a Colt 45 into the plaster wall, which is just above, beneath the bank's ceiling. Just boom, boom. Walks outside, sits in his car, and just waits for the cops to get there. I mean, it's strange, right? He gets arrested. They ask him, what on earth are you doing? And he says, I would rather be arrested than commit murder and treason. Now, of course, they have no idea what he's talking about. No idea. His escape plan was, I've put my warning on record. I reported up the chain to my CIA bosses. I sent a certified letter to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. I warned the patsy to be. I warned Oswald. Everything is on record. Now I'm going to remove myself from this situation, because when this plot goes through, or when all of this happens, if it happens, I don't want anybody to be, I want to have a rock solid alibi. And the most rock solid alibi I can have is to be sitting in a jail cell somewhere for some other crime that I did. So he placed himself by this fake burglary or fake robbery. He places himself in federal custody by virtue of this little escapade at the El Paso bank, rather than be susceptible to a charge of murder and treason. And he goes through with it. He gets convicted of armed robbery, serves 4.5 years in prison, and that's the story of Richard Naggell. But it doesn't end there. What you see from this information so far is that Oswald is being moved into position for this plot by his own admission and his own letters. What you see is that Oswald is leaving a paper trail to create a legend, a very incriminating legend. In other words, Oswald's playing along. Interesting, you look at Naggell, the other counterintelligence agent in this scenario, he is not playing along. In fact, Naggell's actions served notice to both the FBI and the CIA that he was not going to be a pawn in their little game. Now, the plot ends up getting called off because of what Naggell did, and some more information I'm going to give you here in a minute. But and so Naggell probably thought at that moment, in fact, he's even admitted as such, that I saved the president's life by doing what I did. It made it worth it. Of course, we all know he didn't, but it did delay the plot by about 2 months. And if people had paid attention to the Naggell part of this story, this is, think for a second, if the Warren Commission had investigated this Naggell angle, my God, the implications. Just bring him in to testify, for example, the story he could tell, the connections. Based on his story alone, you have connections of Oswald to counterintelligence, to David Atlee Phillips, to Angel and Leopoldo, who are working with Alpha 66, which is a CIA-sponsored group, you have foreknowledge of J. Edgar Hoover. If I'm on the Warren Commission, I hear this story. First person I'm going to depose or subpoena is J. Edgar Hoover. What did you do about the information you received from Richard Naggell? Why didn't you pursue it? You know, um, who did you tell? Who were your CIA bosses that you told? I mean, there's just so many places you could go with this story. It's a bottle rocket, is what it is. It's explosive. We'll come back to it. So that was late September. October 3, we're getting closer to the D-Day. FBI agent. So here in his last story I just told you about Richard Case Naggell, the FBI had foreknowledge of an assassination plot against JFK and didn't pursue it. There's no record of them pursuing anything. They didn't go ask or question Richard Naggell about it. Here's another FBI agent, this time, James Hosty. Now, remember, when Oswald was arrested in New Orleans, he met for several hours with John Quigley, the FBI agent in New Orleans. Remember, he's an FBI informant. So every time, I was thinking about, this guy was 23 years old. And every time he turned around, he's meeting with FBI agents who are then destroying all the notes of the meeting, destroying any record of it, trying to pretend like it never happened. I'm 54 years old. I've never met with an FBI agent in my entire life, once. And he's meeting with them pretty much on a monthly basis. And people try to say he wasn't an FBI informant. Unbelievable. October 3, James Hosty receives word from the New Orleans field office that Oswald and Marina have left New Orleans and they're headed, well, he didn't know where they were headed. He just knew that someone picked him up, and whoever picked him up had Texas license plates. According to this communication, Marina Oswald, who was 8 months pregnant at the time with their second child, left New Orleans. They had a 2-year-old girl, and they were in a station wagon with a Texas license plate, driven by a woman whom, according to the report, could also speak Russian. And that she left alone with the kid and this woman. Oswald didn't accompany her. He remained behind, but he just dropped off the grid. Of course, we know that that's when he went to Mexico City or thereabouts. So this FBI agent, Hosty, was ordered to find Lee and Marina Oswald. All right, so that was October 3. We'll come back to the Hosty story. Now, what happened with this plot, this Naggell plot? Once Naggell was arrested, if you just follow the itinerary of Oswald, you know that once Naggell was arrested, he never made it to Baltimore, Washington with his family. He was redirected to Dallas. So Hosty has just gotten word that the family is no longer in New Orleans. They're probably headed to Texas. This is right after the Naggell arrest. And now he's been ordered to find him. And Oswald, according to all the written letters that he wrote, was supposed to be moving to Washington or Baltimore area, but he never made it. Why? Because the plot got canceled. Naggell screwed it all up for him. If this plot goes through now, and Naggell's testimony ever comes to light, my God, the connections back to intelligence, back to the FBI, back to the CIA, Alpha 66, the whole 9 yards. And you got someone who knows and has left a paper trail, wrote a letter to FBI director, let his bosses at CIA know, has informed the KGB. So the CIA is probably more concerned about that than anything. The Russians know. They know what we're trying to do. So they could use it against us. So anyway, they canceled the whole plot. In late October, Oswald writes another letter to the same Communist Party in New York City. A follow-up. In September, I had written you saying I expected to move from New Orleans, Louisiana to Philadelphia, Baltimore area. Since then, my personal plans have changed, and I have settled in Dallas, Texas for the time. So you just read his letters, and you can see him being moved around from assignment to assignment. And these letters are always addressed to communist organizations so as to further sheep dip him as a communist. That's all going to be useful later in the cover story. October 26, 63. Some more extortion on the part of Hoover. FBI finds out that there are several women at the Quorum Club that are having relations, sexual relations, with both JFK and RFK. This is primo information for Hoover, especially the RFK stuff. He's already got plenty of stuff on Jack. Now he's got something on Bobby. And Bobby's been tormenting him. Bobby's his boss, his direct boss. These are the three women in this scenario. Mariella Novotny and Susie Chang. Turns out these two were part of a communist spy ring who had previously entrapped in a honey trap kind of a situation. John Profumo, who was the British War Minister. This was their job. They go get into these relationships with these high-ranking people. And then, they use their feminine wiles to get information out of it. And then at some point, it's going to be discovered. And now this guy is useless as a British war minister because he's been sleeping with communist spies. And that is information that he would go to any length to try to hide, cover up. So you have blackmail on him. So it appears they're now targeting the president, the attorney general. Of course, when JFK finds out that Hoover knows, he knows exactly what Hoover's going to do with this. So he tells Hoover he was personally interested in having this story killed. Clearly. Hoover, of course, refuses. He leaks this information to Clark Mollenhoff, who was pictured here. He was a syndicated columnist, wrote for the Des Moines Register, one of his columns. And so Mollenhoff writes an article, gets published in the Des Moines Register. Quote, the FBI has established that the beautiful brunettes have been attending parties with congressional leaders and some prominent new frontiersmen, Kennedys, from the executive branch of government, Kennedys. The possibility that their activity might be connected with espionage was of some concern because of the high rank of their male companions. And Mollenhoff claimed that this information had been passed on to John Williams, and was going to pass it on to the Senate Rules Committee. So there's going to be an investigation. And this is Hoover, again, using blackmail information. It's incredibly reckless of the Kennedy brothers to be involved with these ladies. And it's not the first time. And so all Hoover has to do is wait. The predisposition of Jack Kennedy, especially, people think Bobby wasn't a philanderer and all that kind of stuff, but he was. But he was overshadowed by his brother because his brother was of legendary proportion. I mean, he was a legend. And so all you got to do if you're Hoover is wait. At some point in time, Jack, he just can't keep it in his pants. He's going to end up with one of these women. You just follow him around. And you get pictures or you get information from an inside source, and you've always got at the ready compromise that can be used against the White House when you need it. JFK, in a lot of ways, played right into Hoover's hands time and time again. Anyway, that was October 26th. 4 days later, the Chicago Secret Service officer receives an FBI teletype. This is straight from the FBI. It's a teletype warning of an assassination plot against JFK's motorcade on November 2. Now, this came from an FBI informant named Lee. We already know who that is. So Naggell warns of the plot in D.C. It gets canceled. Lee is now informing the FBI, which passes it on to the Secret Service, of a plot in Chicago. And he's specific. He says a hit team of 4 anti-Castro Cubans coming to Chicago. They're going to assassinate him on his motorcade, very similar to Dallas. And of course, Lee, the informant's tip, gets backed up by a landlady who goes into a rooming house bedroom to clean it and finds on the bed all this high-powered weaponry and ammunition, etc., a map of the motorcade and the building location with an X with shots we're going to have. I mean, she reports it too. So, here they're 0 for 2 now on these plots because people on the inside keep screwing it up. So FBI passes these warnings on to the Secret Service. White House ends up finding out, cancels the trip. So here again, foreknowledge. It's Naggell wrote a letter to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover about Washington. Foreknowledge. But it doesn't end there. Just so you think, oh, okay, well, they decided they're not going to try to kill Kennedy anymore. No. Now it's an FBI teletype from an FBI informant that there's another plot on November 2nd, which tells you, if you're competent at all, that this is something that they're going to keep trying. They're literally stalking him, going from city to city, following him around. And the FBI is right there at the forefront with this information, both times. Now back to the Hosty story. So the last day of October, Hosty finds Marina Oswald, and he finds that Russian woman in Texas. She lives in the outskirts of Texas, a town called Irving. And her name is Ruth Payne. So he starts looking into Michael and Ruth Payne. Now, according to what he learned, the couple was separated at the time. So when he would visit the Payne household, he'd only see Ruth. He wouldn't see Michael, but that was her husband. We find out that was all a matter of convenience. But anyway, so he starts conducting credit checks, criminal background checks, employment checks, et cetera, on Michael and Ruth Payne. And he finds out some interesting things. Like Michael Payne works for Bell Helicopter, which is a huge CIA front down there in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then he looks into Ruth's family history, finds out she's CIA through and through. Her sister currently at the same time works for the CIA. And there are all kinds of CIA connections. So he determines that they're both CIA agents, is what he learns. And since the FBI doesn't trust the CIA, which is why they have Oswald informing on the CIA to them, he wants to keep close tabs on what's going on in that house. He knows she speaks Russian. And of course, Marina is Russian. And he knows that Lee is CIA. So you have essentially a CIA house. Michael and Ruth Payne are CIA. Lee, whose family is living there, is CIA, also an FBI informant. What he doesn't know then, what we find out later, is that Marina is KGB. You talk about an intelligence quagmire. They're in Irving, Texas. So that was October 31st. The next day, he goes and visits her. And he interviews Marina via Ruth. Marina spoke very broken English. So Ruth was always there as an interpreter, which became a problem later on. These investigators became suspicious about Ruth and what she was actually saying in her interpretive role. Anyway, Hosty explains to Ruth on November 1st that the FBI really wants to know where Lee is. And so Ruth says, well, Marina and the child, and eventually, after she gives birth, the two children are going to be living with me. I know Lee is here somewhere in the Dallas area, I think in the Oak Cliff area. I don't know his address. So Hosty says, well, where's he working? And she's a little bit hesitant to tell him. Then she finally says, well, he works at the Texas School Book Depository building. I helped him get that job. It's downtown Dallas. I don't know the address. So they got out the phone book and they went to the phone book and they found the address, 411 Elm Street. This all happened on November 1st. Now, this is an FBI agent, okay? And what he is learning and reporting up the chain is that this guy that's already been in a letter from Richard Naggell addressed as the patsy in an assassination plot has now moved to Dallas. And this is after this same informant informed the FBI that there was an assassination plot against JFK in Chicago, which turned out to be true, by the way. They ended up arresting 2 of the 4 Cubans and couldn't hold him for anything, but they did arrest another guy who was supposed to be the Chicago patsy and disappeared him. But anyway, if you're the FBI, you know the 2 plots were credible. They both got canceled because they were both exposed. And you know the guy at central to both of them is now in Dallas. You found his family. Your guy found his family. And you know where he's working. So on the 5th, Hosty returns to Ruth Payne's house. Again, this is a second interview with Marina. Marina there was no love lost between her and Hosty. She didn't trust him. So she crawls out the back window. While Hosty and Ruth Payne are in the front room talking, Marina crawls out the back window of her bedroom, sneaks around the side of the house, runs out with a pad of paper, writes down Hosty's license plate number, and then she runs around back, crawls back in the window, just in time to see Hosty leaving. So he never actually talked to her. But she got the license plate number. Just kind of a little interesting anecdote. 7 days later, so this is the 5th, this is 7 days later, a man gets off an elevator, the FBI office in downtown Dallas there, and he begins approaching her desk. And she's like a secretary or something. And he identifies himself as, quote, Mr. Oswald. This is according to Nanny Lee Fenner. And he asked to see S.A. Hosty, please. S.A. stands for Special Agent. And she said that he had a, quote, wild look in his eye. He was awfully fidgety, and he had a 3x5 envelope in his hand. According to Fenner, when she told him that Hosty wasn't there, this Oswald became hostile. And she said he threw the envelope at me. She said, well, get this to him. And he turned and he left. And Fenner said that she looked down at this envelope and there was a folded piece of paper sticking out the top with a handwritten message. Oswald always handwrote everything. If you continue harassing my wife, quote, I will either blow up the Dallas Police Department or the FBI office, end of quote. And there was a signature, Lee Harvey Oswald. This is according to Nanny Lee Fenner on November 12th. Now, again, foreknowledge. This is all happening. This is the FBI office. This is Oswald allegedly threatening an FBI building, writing a letter to an FBI agent, right? This is after he, as an FBI informant, informed the FBI there was a plot in Chicago. This is after Naggell informed Hoover, FBI director, there's a plot in Washington. Foreknowledge. It gets better. 15th of November. So now that was the 12th. Here's the 15th. A Miami detective, S.J. Hebert, wrote a memo. He got a phone call from the Secret Service, Agent Jameson. And Agent Jameson, the Secret Service, wanted to talk to this FBI informant named William Somersett, who was in Miami. Somerset's job was to report on the activities of white supremacy groups and had secretly recorded a conversation a few days earlier, which he passed on to the FBI. and who then forwarded it on to the Secret Service. And now the Secret Service has put it in there in Agent Jameson's hands. And they said, find out about this. So he's calling back to Miami to find out. He wants to talk to this FBI informant because what's on this tape is pretty startling. Anyway, as an FBI informant, he had contact with a man named Joseph Miltier, pictured here top and also the bottom. I'll explain the bottom picture in a minute. Anyway, this guy was a member of the White Citizens Council in Georgia. So remember now, Somersett's job was to report on the activities of white supremacy groups. Well, Miltier was a white supremacist. He belonged to a White Citizens Council. So Somersett had infiltrated that group, become friendly with Miltier, and was getting information out of him. Right? On November 5th, so 10 days prior, Miltier had told Somerset that Kennedy was a, quote, marked man. And when Somerset asked him, what do you mean? How would that happen? Miltier replied, quote, from an office building with a high-powered rifle. This is an FBI informant who immediately goes back and informs the FBI, who pass it on to the Secret Service. And now the Secret Service is investigating it. By the way, that bottom picture, you see the arrow and the motorcade there. You see Kennedy and Jackie approaching. We don't know for a fact, but that a lot of people think that is Miltier in Dallas, who went to see what he predicted was going to happen. Anyway, that was on the 15th. On the 16th, a group identifying itself as the Cuban Commandos mailed a threat to assassinate JFK in Miami. This was what they wrote to the chief of police in Miami, quote, the Cuban Commandos have the bombs ready for killing JFK and Mayor King High, either at the airport or the convention hall. So Secret Service finds out about this, and they decide, well, instead of flying into the airport on Air Force One, we'll just take a helicopter. We'll land on a ball field. We'll be in and out 4 hours in Miami to minimize our exposure. By the way, neither of these Miami threats, the Miltier or this Cuban Commando threat, were ever shared with the Warren Commission. So if the Warren Commission, and of course the FBI is the one that knows about all of this. So it'd be on the FBI to say, hey, none of this was, by the way, the Chicago plot wasn't shared with the Warren Commission, neither Miami plot. Obviously, the Washington plot wasn't. Now, if you're the Warren Commission, that seems like an important piece of information or pieces of information to have to establish a pattern to say, okay, we're saying the patsy was Lee Harvey Oswald, killed him in Dallas. If all these previous plots existed, then he must have been in those places too. They just didn't succeed, or he didn't attempt them because it wasn't, it wasn't right or whatever. But if he's the guy that killed him, then he would have been the guy in these previous places as well. But of course, that's not how, by not sharing any of that information, there's no pattern. So you can't find out that really the plot in Washington was uncovered by a counterintelligence agent who implicated Oswald, but said it was actually a CIA conspiracy. Ooh, that's not information you want the Warren Commission to have. You don't want the Warren Commission to know that there was another plot involving these Cubans that got uncovered by an FBI informant, and then you start finding, and there was actually an arrest of those two Cubans. When you find out later who those two Cubans are, they're both connected to one of them, David Morales, was connected to the CIA. He was a self-described CIA assassin. So you can't share these previous plots to the Warren Commission because it ties back to the CIA. And you can't share them because the FBI had foreknowledge. And now, if you've got a Warren Commission, that means the president's been assassinated, he's been killed. So the next question would be, well, if the FBI had foreknowledge, what did they do with that foreknowledge? So you just can't share any of that with them. So they just withhold it. So the next day, This guy's name is William Walter. He was the FBI night clerk on duty. This is 5 days before the assassination. We don't find out about this till 1976, when he provides the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is looking into, the church hearings. They're looking into intelligence problems with our intelligence agencies, corruption, all these covert operations that are illegal, blah, blah, blah. So in 76, he provides the Senate Intelligence Committee with a copy of the text of an FBI telex that was sent to all FBI field offices 5 days before the assassination. And he had a copy of it. So this is more foreknowledge. This is not having to do with Washington, D.C. That's another story of which they had foreknowledge. This has nothing to do with Chicago, of which they had foreknowledge, but that's a separate incident. This doesn't even have anything to do with the 2 Miami plots or the Tampa plot. This is all about Dallas. So now we're getting to the actual location where the assassination happened. And it reads as follows. There is a threat to assassinate President Kennedy in Dallas on November 22nd. Bureau has determined that a militant revolutionary group may attempt to assassinate President Kennedy on his proposed trip to Dallas. All receiving officers should immediately contact all race and hate group informants, like Miltier, and determine if there's any basis for this threat. Bureau should be kept advised of all developments by teletype. Other officers have been advised. On the right, that's the picture of the actual copy. You can see signatures where people signed off on it after having read it, received it. 5 days before the assassination. This guy, Walter, immediately after the assassination on November 22nd, remembers this telex. So he runs back to his New Orleans office, his FBI office. He retrieves the telex, which he kept. He made a copy of it. Days later, when he rechecks for that same telex because he wants to tell the story or maybe show somebody else, it's gone. And when he starts checking, it's like the telex never happened. It just vanished in all the offices across the country. No one has it. It's gone. The only one who has it is him, and that's because he made a copy of it. Foreknowledge. All right, November 18th, 4 days before the assassination. The Soviet embassy receives a crudely typed, badly spelled letter signed by a Lee H. Oswald of Dallas. I remember I've mentioned this a couple times. He always hand wrote. Always hand wrote. He never typed anything. And that's going to be something that the KGB catches. It's a detailed KGB catches. Anyway, the timing of this letter was very purposeful, 4 days before the assassination, implicating the Soviets in a conspiracy with Oswald to assassinate JFK 4 days later. And if you read the text of the letter, you see what I'm saying. It starts off, quote, "This is to inform you of recent events since my meetings with Comrade Kostin in the embassy of the Soviet Union in Mexico City, Mexico." This is Kostikov. Comrade Kostikov was the assassination specialist of the KGB that David Atlee Phillips in his disinformation campaign, when this Mexico City story dumps, is going to try to convince everybody that this guy, Lee Harvey Oswald, met with Comrade Kostikov, who's this assassination expert, trying to get a Cuban passport. So he's obviously planning the assassination in advance and then planning his getaway for afterwards. He's going to go to Cuba. Right? This is the cover story that's going to get dumped. This is the Mexico City story that David Atlee Phillips and the CIA is going to dump on the American people within hours of the assassination. But 4 days prior to that, in corroboration They tell Oswald, right, or whomever wrote this letter, I don't believe it was Oswald, type up this letter, sign his name, but talk about this meeting in Mexico City with Comrade Kostikov so that the Mexico City story that we produce after the assassination is corroborated by the letter that Oswald wrote 4 days before the assassination, and vice versa. I mean, the purpose of the letter is clear, is so obvious, to assert a connection between Oswald and the KGB. This is going to be, in addition to his Mexico City hijinks, which is going to be released afterwards, this letter is going to, now here's the thing. Every letter that goes in and out of the Soviet embassy in DC is the mail is opened first by the FBI, and they copy it. Everybody knows that. The American embassy in the Soviet Union, same thing happens. KGB reads all their mail. We read all their mail. So whoever sent this letter to, I'm sure it was the CIA, sent this letter to the embassy, Soviet embassy, knew that the FBI was going to read it, and that this would be handy information to have. The FBI would have a copy of it, and they would release it at the same time that the CIA released its story about Mexico City, and the two would corroborate each other. It was intentional. And it would all tie back to the Soviets. And part of this long-running false flag operation to try to provoke a war between us and the Soviets, or us and the Cubans. That's the whole purpose of Dallas. So, as I explained, it's customary. The Oswald letter was intercepted, opened, and copied by the FBI. And whoever sent that knew that that would happen. And that's why they sent it. All letters addressed to the Soviet embassy were routinely intercepted by the FBI, meaning that the author intended for the FBI to read it and then strategically release it to the public afterwards. But what the author or the sender of this letter don't know or don't realize or don't fully appreciate is that just a couple months prior, because of Richard Case Naggell, the Soviets knew, the KGB and all these Soviet officials already knew that this whole thing was being set up, because now their thinking was that it was about this Washington plot. But now when they get this letter, they realize, oh, they haven't quit. They didn't stop. You know, Richard Case Naggell's sitting in a jail cell now. So they lost their agent. But they because of the information he sent to them in September, or passed up the, or gave to them in September, they know the basic outline of this plot. And they know that Oswald went to Mexico City. And they know that was part of the setup. So now they get a letter about his meeting in Mexico City with Kostikov. Of course, they know that Kostikov didn't meet with him because Kostikov's their guy. So they know that's a fabrication. So they know that this letter is a fabrication. And it's all about setting up the Soviets. And they know all that because the key that unlocks this whole secret is Richard Case Naggell. So we're back to that story again. So the Soviets realized that this letter was a setup to scapegoat the Soviets for the JFK assassination through the patsy, Lee Harvey Oswald. So what do? Anatoly Dobrynin, who is the Soviet ambassador, he cables this, and this needs the attention of the higher ups, right? The party chairman, the party leaders back in Moscow. And he writes, quote, "This letter was clearly a provocation. It gives the impression that we had close ties with Oswald and were using him for some purposes of our own. It was totally unlike any other letters the embassy had previously received from Oswald. The suspicion that the letter is a forgery is heightened by the fact that it was typed, whereas all the other letters the embassy received from Oswald before were handwritten." And that was true of his letters here in America as well. He never typed. I mean, even the Fair Play for Cuba flyer that we got a copy of when he hand drew a mock-up for the printers, it's all hand-drawn. Everything was hand-drawn. One gets the definite impression that the letter was concocted by those who, judging from everything, are involved in the president's assassination. This is 4 days prior. So Moscow has a decision to make. How are we going to preempt this? How are we going to, uh, you know, we got lucky in Washington, even though our agent didn't kill him like he was supposed to. He took himself out, and they canceled the plot. But here they're trying again, and they're going to try to blame the same guy, the same patsy. They're trying to regurgitate the same plan, and we don't have a Richard Case Naggell on our side this time. So what do we do? So Dobrynin and Anastas Mikoyan, who was the first deputy chairman of the Soviet Council of Ministers, you're getting pretty high ranking here in the Soviet government, agreed that we're going to publicly return a copy of this letter to U.S. authorities, along with its formal assertions, this is from the Soviet government, that the letter was a forgery, quote, and was sent as a deliberate provocation. In other words, we're going to tell the government that we are onto your game. We know exactly what this is. We know we have information. This is a way to communicate to the CIA, to the FBI, to the United States government. And it's a paper trail. It's being sent through diplomatic channels. This is as official as it gets. All this other stuff is secret, right? But they're responding publicly. So in essence, what they did by publicly returning this letter and calling it a fake, the Soviets overturned, just completely preempted the whole thing. They overturned the propaganda value of this letter, calling it out for what it was, counterfeit, pointing a finger away from the patsy, Oswald, and to the American conspirators. And just like the CIA created Mexico City story, which would drop about 4.5, 5 days later, the CIA planted letter and its FBI accomplice plan backfired. So here what we have is the CIA wrote this letter, typed it, brought in all the details that would corroborate the Mexico City story, which the CIA and David Atlee Phillips was putting together to release after the assassination. The two letters will corroborate each other, point the finger at Cuba, point the finger at Russia, through the patsy, Lee Harvey Oswald. But here, a second time, the KGB is wise to the plan. The first time because of Richard Case Naggell. The second time, still because of Richard Case Naggell. They realize the plot is the same, but it's the letter this time, and they overturn it by publicly repudiating it and calling it out for what it was. And this is, again, and when I say it's a CIA letter and the FBI's were going to be accomplices in this, is because the CIA knew that the FBI would open the mail, make a copy of it, and release this after the assassination. So again, the FBI has foreknowledge, again, at least 4 days in advance. Now they have foreknowledge of not just an assassination plot, but of how it's an American plot. They now know, because of the receipt of the letter back from the Soviets, that the Soviets are on to what's going on, and that if all this gets exposed to the Warren Commission, to the American people, the gig is up, right? That's why all this has to be hidden, because anybody with any kind of common sense could put this together and realize what this is. So I think the Richard Case Naggell story is a really important part of this whole assassination scenario. And if the Warren Commission had access to Richard Case Naggell or all of these previous plots, which of course all the evidence that's coming to the Warren Commission is coming through the FBI. So what that means is that the FBI, which has knowledge of all these previous plots, which has knowledge of Richard Case Naggell, has knowledge of Chicago. It was an FBI informant They have an FBI telex of the assassination plot in Dallas. They know about the Miami plots. They know about Tampa, which we didn't talk about, but they know about it. They know about Lee Harvey Oswald being set up. Hoover has a letter from Richard Case Naggell about it. Now they know that the Soviets know the whole thing's a setup. They have all this information, foreknowledge. If any of it ends up for the Warren Commission, heads are going to roll. And you can't blame this all on Lee Harvey Oswald. But essentially what happens is the Warren Commission rubber stamps the Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone narrative because the FBI laundered the evidence to make sure that the only evidence the Warren Commission received was the incriminating kind. I've just given enough evidence in one episode that completely exonerates Lee Harvey Oswald. None of it was shared with the Warren Commission. And all that evidence comes through the filter of J. Edgar Hoover. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for joining. Until next time, God bless. Have a great day.